to this video tutorial where I'm going to explain how to work the front post anchoring variation of an anchored front post to give the impression of working stitches horizontally or slightly curved. So in this example, which is the stag border, I have worked a slightly curved stitch, created a slightly curved impression. Here at the bottom is a very narrow and also slightly curved and soft curve of two stitches that are worked around each other. Here is another test of the stag that I made, and also here it's almost like a flat stitch, but in combination with the others there is a slight curve, and here a bigger mouth, and again a variation of the stag pattern where we have that quite flat stitch, and here a cute little curved variation. And this is what it looks like in contrast when the stitches are worked, when two stitches are worked in the same front loop. And here we have a stitch that is worked around the other stitch. You can see how that looks different. It's also continued differently, but you see the principle is different. So this is two stitches worked in the same front loop, and this one is here one stitch worked around the other. So we get a bit of a different feel for it. So also generally a front post stitch is worked another stitch that was made in a previous round or row, and then the front post is anchored around that stem, and like here, and then usually it pulls it upwards. So if I work a front post here, then I work it around the stem of the stitch, and then it creates an upward pull. While when I work, let's use this because when I work in the same round, so I've made a stitch in a front loop here, and then I work around the same, this stitch just made in the same round, then I'm not working towards the top of the stitch, but the pull direction of the stitch is opposite to this one, and that creates an almost flat stitch. So let's see how to make it. So let's make a front post anchoring stitch -2 -0, and they will always, those anchoring stitches will always be front post because we're working around another stitch. So to start with, let's just first make a stitch. I'm going to make front post +2 -0. So I'm working in the same round, -1, sorry. So starting to count from the next stitch, I go 1, 2 ahead, and this front loop here belongs to the stitch from one round below. So this front loop, I'm going to work a stitch into this front loop. So just a treble into this front loop. Now I'm going to skip the stitch that is behind this one. I'm going to work a single crochet in the next, single crochet in back loop. That's the back loop of the stitch where I anchored this one, and one more single crochet. And now I'm working a front post anchoring stitch -2 0. And the 0 is because I'm working in round 0 here, which in the round 0 down, which means I'm working in the same round, not one round below. And I'm going back to work 2 stitches to work around this stitch. And you see, usually we would work in the next round, and this would create this upward pull of the by the front post. And now I'm just only working backwards. I'm not creating a pull towards this end, the top end of the stitch, but the bottom end, the anchoring end. So I'm working back, and I go around this anchoring part, or around this part where the stitch is anchored, and I'm working a treble of front post treble around this stitch. And if I skip the stitch and work in the next, that anchors my stitch down. And now you can see how this can either be a slightly curved stitch, depending on what I continue in the next round or how I continue in the next round. So for example, if I work upwards, then this stitch will be anchored, and maybe this creates a slight curve. But if I work in this direction and pull this stitch in this direction, then it's quite flat. So I've got a choice to create flat stitches, and like that it even looks like it's made in just really flat. Yeah? So this is the front post anchoring variation, which you can also find as a PDF document or as part of the Image Overlay Crochet terminology document, which is linked below. So that's how we work the front post anchoring stitches. And the abbreviation for these kind of stitches is FP for the front post, and then the treble or double treble or whatever the stitch is, and then how far back you go. So it will always be 0 at the end because we're working in the same round as before. And then mine here was 2 stitches back from the next stitch. The next stitch would have been this one, and I went 1 stitch back and then 2 stitches back, where this stitch here, this part that I made first, was anchored. You could have a longer stitch that maybe is 3 stitches back, and then that would be a front post treble or maybe a double treble anc -3, so it's A and C. So it's a front post, whatever it is, treble or double treble, then a dash, and then A and C for anchoring and working around the anchored end, which is this. This is the anchoring end or the anchoring end of the stitch here. So, and you can find a few links down below where this stitch is used or is going to be used or was used. And then maybe I see in one of the tutorials or when we talk about it in one of the master classes. Okay, I'll see you then.